Well, good evening, everyone. Good evening, good evening, good evening. You do not have to adjust your cameras. Yes, I do have a swollen lip. No, I was not punched in the face by my spouse. I was not fighting because somebody cut me off in traffic. Um, I didn't have a failed Botox injection. This is the result of an allergic reaction to an epinephrine shot. Had to have some dental work done today. Had numerous epinephrine shots in my mouth. And this is the result. So, for those of you that had questions about whether or not Dr. Pitts is vain, clearly, I am not. Even though I was encouraged to not do the live tonight because my face has been swollen all day and my lips still look like somebody bust me in them. The conversation that we're having tonight is significantly more important than vanity or looks or anything else. Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, I am Dr. Lauren Pitts Bounds, licensed couple marriage and family therapist, and this is the Thursday, April the 25th edition of Dr. Pitts Tips Live. And tonight we are talking about sexual abuse trauma. But before we get into the discussion tonight, I wanted to share with you, I have to start doing this just in the instance of sound business, that our mental health web pages, podcasts, reels, recordings, and lives provide information, not advice. The mental health, behavioral, and relationship content is provided for general information only. They are not intended to and does not amount to advice which you should rely on. They are not in any way an alternative to specific advice or actual treatment and care from your own mental health, behavioral, or relationship practitioner. You must therefore obtain the relevant professional or specialist advice before taking or refraining from any action based on the information we provide. If you have any questions about any medical matter, you should consult your doctor or other professional healthcare provider without delay. If you think you're experiencing any medical or mental health condition, you should seek immediate medical or mental health attention from a doctor or other professional healthcare provider. For medical emergencies, you can dial 911. For mental health emergencies, you can dial 988. No representation, warranties, or guarantees. Although we make reasonable efforts to compile accurate information in our mental health, behavioral, and relationship information web pages, podcasts, reels, recordings, and lives, and to update the information on a regular basis, we make no representations, warranties, or guarantees, whether expressed or implied, that the content is accurate, complete, or up to date. As I said, I am Dr. Lauren Pitts Bounds, licensed couple marriage and family therapist, and I am a survivor of sexual abuse and sexual violence. And that is what we are talking about tonight. April is Sexual Abuse Awareness Month, and sexual violence is sexual activity when consent is not obtained or freely given. It is a serious public health problem in the United States that profoundly impacts lifelong health, opportunity, and well-being. Sexual violence impacts every community and affects people of all genders, sexual orientations, and ages. Anyone can experience or perpetrate sexual violence. The perpetrator of sexual violence is usually someone the survivor knows, such as a friend, current or former intimate partner, co-worker, neighbor, family member, coach, members in clergy. The list goes on and on and on. Simply put, the perpetrator of sexual abuse and sexual violence can be anyone. And in addition to this being Sexual Abuse Awareness Month, I thought that it extremely important to have these discussions, because one of the things that I have learned from doing this work all of these years, one of the things that I have learned, hi Kari, I am well, thank you. One of the things that I have learned from being a survivor of sexual abuse and sexual violence is that Too many times it is the dirty little secret that is swept under the rug. People don't want to talk about it as if to suggest that it is not happening, and it is happening far more frequently than I'm sure many of you realize. I'm going to share some stats with you. I want to share them verbatim because I really want you to get at the essence of how important this topic is, how important it is for those of you that may be tuning in that have been victims of sexual abuse or sexual violence and never disclosed to anyone. Those of you that may have disclosed to someone and excuse me, were not believed or did not feel like you were emotionally safe enough to be able to have substantive conversations around the things that happened to you. And I also want to make you aware from the perspective of parents and leaders that it is so easy, goodness gracious, it is so easy to overlook. It is so easy to ignore the warning signs. I'm going to share something with you that may shock you, and I'm not disclosing any names. I'm not even going to disclose, how I know the person or anything like that. But I remember when I first disclosed to someone that I had been sexually abused, and just the difficulty that it was in disclosing that information. And I remember it like it was yesterday, because the person said to me that they thought that something had happened to me because they felt that for my age that I was extremely hypersexual, but they decided, because it was a choice on their part, rather than to explore, rather than to have the elephant in the room conversation with me regarding whether or not something in fact had happened to me, what they decided to do was to chalk it up to me just being a rebellious, disobedient young person. And I can only wonder how many of you had that same experience or had a comparable experience. I can only wonder how many of you may have had someone disclose to you, and for any number of reasons, you decided not to believe the person. So I want to share with you some stats, and then I'm going to really load you up. I'm going to load you up. We are going the full hour tonight because I do not have an 8 p.m. session, and I believe that this information is so incredibly important. Sexual violence affects millions of people each year in the United States. Researchers know the numbers underestimate this problem because many cases are unreported. And the reason why people don't report is for a variety of reasons. Survivors may be ashamed, embarrassed, or afraid to tell police, friends, or family about the violence. Victims may also keep quiet because they've been threatened with further harm if they tell anyone or do not think anyone will help them. The data shows that sexual violence is common, that sexual violence starts early, that sexual violence disproportionately affects some groups. Sexual violence is costly, and sexual violence can happen to you or to anyone that you know. When we're talking about child sexual abuse occurs when an adult, a much older child, or someone in a position of power forces a child to have some type of sexual contact with them. Most often, sexual abuse involves acts such as kissing, fondling, rubbing, oral sex, or penetration of the vagina or buttocks by fingers, penis, or a foreign object. How common is sexual abuse among children? Child sexual abuse cuts across racial, ethnic, religious, and economic groups. Research shows that roughly 1 in 4 girls and 1 in 6 boys are abused before the age of 18. I'm going to restate that because you need to let that sink in. 1 in 4 girls and 1 in 6 boys are abused before the age of 18. So I want you to envision all of your children, all of your nieces, all of your nephews, for those of you that are educators, all of the children that are under your tutelage. And I want you in your mind's eye to pull out one out of every 4 girls. And I want you to pull out one out of every 6 boys. And I want you to get that visual image in your mind's eye. Because part of the reason why this is such a problem is because of sheer ignorance. And I don't say that to be disrespectful. I don't say that to be judgmental or critical. I state it because it's a fact. The Bible says that people perish for lack of knowledge. Well, our children are perishing. They're perishing because their parents and educators and their coaches and the team parents and so on and so forth. People have not taken the time to appropriately educate themselves about these horrific acts. And it's time. It's time to recognize that any of us at any given time can be vulnerable. We can be vulnerable to sexual violence. We can be vulnerable to sexual abuse. And my question is that you? Or is that someone that you know? Or is that one of your children? I was an adult when I finally decided that I was not going to carry the weight of that secret anymore. And the reason why I didn't disclose prior to that is because I didn't feel emotionally safe to do that. I didn't feel that the people that I needed to believe me would believe me. So I didn't share. And I'm not alone on that island. It takes an exorbitant amount of courage and strength to be able to disclose such horrific acts. And if you don't feel safe, whether you be a child, an adolescent, or an adult, if you don't feel safe to be able to do that, then you carry that secret and the pain associated with it on the inside of you. And I guarantee you, as sure as my name is Lauren, that it's going to come out in all types of ways. As you reflect upon your life, I really want you to be honest with yourself. And you don't have to tell me, but I want you to be honest with yourself first and foremost as you reflect and really take note of how carrying the weight of that secret, particularly for those of you that have never disclosed, how the weight of that secret has permeated every single solitary aspect of your life. Because it shows up. It shows up in your relationships, first and foremost in your relationship with yourself. It shows up in how you parent. It shows up in how you connect with your intimate partners. It shows up with how you may interact with other people with whom maybe you've heard things about. I've worked with clients over the years that had to still interact with their perpetrator and they never disclosed. So not only are they carrying that secret, they're being forced with the pain, the horror at times of having to continue to deal with this person that violated them in such egregious ways. Something else that I want to share with you as it relates to statistics is this. Over half of women have experienced sexual violence involving physical contact during their lifetime. Half. About 1 in 3 men have experienced sexual violence involving physical contact during their lifetime. And I want to pause there for a moment because it's necessary to address the dysfunctional attitude that is connected to men who have been sexually abused. Our society needs to really reevaluate how it views and handles men that have been sexually abused. I've had the misfortune of knowing men that have been sexually abused that were taught to justify their abuse as it was something that was just making them men. And what I said to someone one time is this: if what that older girl or what that older woman did to you in your most vulnerable state as a child or as an adolescent, if that person did that to one of your children, would you think it was all boo-boo and giggles then? Would it be all fun and games then? It looks real different when you've got a teacher at school sexually abusing your 11-year-old son or your 11-year-old daughter. It's not a notch in the belt anymore. And it's so incredibly important that people take this more seriously. It's not a joke. It's not making a boy a man. It's not making a girl a woman. It's a horrific violation. It is against the law, and it is causing lasting damage. Because again, when it's carried as a secret, it eats you up from the inside out like cancer. I said at the very beginning of the session that sexual violence is costly. Well, Dr. Pitts, what do you mean sexual violence is costly? The estimated lifetime cost of rape is $122,461 per victim. So between medical treatment when it's actually reported, between mental health treatment and care, between the associated judicial cost of bringing the violator to justice, $122,461. What could you do with that money? What could you do? Would it be a down payment on a house? Could it be college tuition? Could it make some of you debt-free and financially independent? Could it be part of your 401k or your Roth IRA? Could it be part of your investment portfolio? $122,461. I want to, as important as this is where adults are concerned, I want to put some emphasis for a moment, if you will extend that grace to me, because I really want to put the emphasis on childhood sexual abuse. So I've heard people say, and I know each of you have heard people say too, well, I mean, he doesn't look like a pedophile. She doesn't look like a child molester. There's no clear-cut description or profile of a sex offender. And there's no way to recognize a potential abuser. Statistics do show us, though, that most are men, but women are not excluded. I've worked with clients throughout my career who have been abused. I know people, both male and female, that have been abused by both sexes. Here's the part that should alarm you. Most abusers are often known and trusted by the children that they abuse, such as cousins, uncles, caregivers, step-parents, grandparents, or other individuals familiar to the children in the household, around the neighborhood, in the school, on the football field, the basketball court, the track field. Some abusers may have been victims themselves, but statistics also show us that most victims do not become abusers. It's a small percentage of those that have been abused that become abusers. When you think about how sexual abuse affects children, some of the behavior that they may demonstrate may replicate signs of PTSD. Some of you are running around the house and the neighborhood and your jobs talking about how bad your kids are and how ill-behaved they are and how they hard-headed and they just don't listen, and every time you turn around they disobeying and blah 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 blah, when in actuality one of the underlying reasons that they may be behaving the way that they are is because something has happened to them. This is not a license for you to get paranoid. It's not. I want to educate you. I want to empower you regarding the importance of having the elephant in the room conversations with your children. You need to be able to have the hard conversation. And if you can't have the hard conversation, you need to be responsible enough to find someone who can have it for you in your presence. A great place to start. Now, most of you, if not all of you, are familiar with YouTube. The Barbara Sinatra Children's Center has an entire library of interactive, animated is what I was trying to say, I apologize, of animated videos that you can use as teaching tools to have these difficult conversations with your children. They go from kindergarten all the way up to like late middle school, early high school. They're really, really, really cute videos, but they're extremely, extremely informative. What I recommend my parents to do that I work with is watch the videos yourself. They're not long. The videos range in time from like 2 to 3 minutes. I think the longest one may be like 7 minutes or something like that. But they're short, sweet, and to the point. But they're extremely informative, and they can empower you regarding how to have these much needed conversations. And then you have to open the door to create a safe space for your child to be able to speak openly and honestly with you. Let me caution you. Having a child disclose to you that someone has brought them harm because of sexual abuse or sexual violence, as difficult as it may be for you to hear this disturbing information, you have to regulate your emotions. You have to. Because part of the problem is, and I'm going to be transparent with you as I always am, part of the difficulty that I had that made me decide to not disclose was because there were other circumstances going on in my life that were equally traumatic. And I felt very strongly that had I disclosed, it was going to result in even more trauma. That's my PC way of saying I knew somebody was going to get hurt. There was no doubt in my mind. There was no doubt in my mind whatsoever that had I disclosed at that time, it was a strong possibility that someone was going to end up dead or bodily, experiencing bodily harm, but not death. So, Dr. Pitts, how do we handle that? You have to be the adult in the room. You have to make a conscious decision, even if it means you have to bite your tongue off. You have to maintain your composure, because the moment you flick off, the moment that you come unglued and start going crazy, the moment the child shuts down, because now the fear kicks in. There was already fear to disclose, but now the child is taking on the responsibility. I'm telling you, I worked with kids for years. The kid is taking on the responsibility of thinking that it's their fault, that they're the reason why someone else may experience harm or whatever the case may be. So you have to be diligent in controlling yourself. Many children who have been sexually abused develop these symptoms, like I said, that are related to PTSD, distressing and frequent memories or nightmares of the abuse, efforts to avoid thoughts, people, or settings that remind them of the abuse, sleep problems, difficulty with concentration, angry outbursts. You may start to see bedwetting, or the child may start having bowel movements in bed. And you have to educate yourself in order to be able to have the appropriate conversation with the child. Many of you are screamers, yellers, hoopers, hollers, cussers, and fussers. And I bet for many of you, you're so busy screaming, yelling, hooping, hollering, cussing, and fussing at your children that you never even took into consideration, or you made assumptions regarding why the child may be acting out. And certainly there are a number of reasons why children may act out, but there's also some pretty serious ones that are far beyond the child just being rebellious or hard-headed. And you as the parent, or you as the primary caregiver, or you as the educator, you have to take the responsibility and accountability for exploring that rationally, calmly, in an emotionally safe way, so that you can get to the root of what's going on. I want to give a sidebar here, because I've heard this scenario that I'm getting ready to give too many times. I've been accused of coming really, really hard regarding things that I'm passionate about. So I'm going to do my level best to say this as calmly and as respectfully and rationally as I can. Here goes. If you're one of these women that is so broken, that is so dysfunctional, that is so shattered because of the curveballs that life has thrown at you, that you disregard your child telling you that your boyfriend or their father or their other sibling's father or mother or whomever has had inappropriate sexual contact with them. If you disregard that, shame on you. It's your responsibility to believe the child, to Examine the facts as presented so that you can make sure that you are making a well-informed decision regarding whether or not your child has been subjected to some sort of violation. If you don't do that, you are doing your child a major disservice. And unfortunately, you are in essence co-signing an adverse childhood experience that could haunt them and torment them for many years to come. You have a responsibility to believe your child. And if the facts, the hardcore concrete facts, demonstrate otherwise, that's a different conversation. I don't know how many of you watch my podcast, but I had a guest on at the latter part of last year. It might have even been in the beginning of this year. It might have been the beginning of this year. And he was a former scholar athlete who started being sexually abused by his coach and a number of others and ended up being human trafficked. And he was never able to have the conversation with his mother as a child or as an adolescent. But when he attempted to have that conversation with her as an adult, her reasoning for not believing him was that these individuals that were sexually abusing her child for years had paid some of her bills and put them in a beautiful home and had a nice car and all of these material things. In essence, she indirectly sold her child for the sake of material gain. And guess what, folks? They're not the only ones that this has happened to. There are others. I can't even go into the magnitude of horror stories I've heard as it relates to sexual abuse. What I want to share with you is something that may shock you. I want to share with you that this happens far more frequently than many of you may realize. Well, Dr. Pitts, what are you saying? This is what I'm saying. I'm going to give you a rundown of people. I want you to pay close attention because I don't think there's too many young people on Facebook like that these days, or they're on Instagram. So many of you older, more seasoned adults, definitely some of these names will be familiar to you, and perhaps to some of the young people too. So these are a list of familiar names of people who have been sexually abused at some point in time in their lifetime. And I'm sharing this just so you have some insight regarding how easily it can happen to somebody you know. Tom Arnold, Drew Carey, Derek Luke, Tyler Perry, Roseanne Barr, Drew Barrymore, Halle Berry, Delta Burke, Angie Dickinson, Fran Drescher, Anna Marie, Patty Duke, Farrah Fawcett, Terry Hatcher, Goldie Hawn, Ann Heck, Kelly McGillis, Rose McGowan, Rosie O'Donnell, Tatum O'Neal, Rosie Perez, Suzanne Summers, Gabrielle Union, Cindy Williams, Greg Louganis, Maya Angelou, Antoine Fisher, George Orwell, Ann Sexton, Virginia Woolf, Ellen DeGeneres, Christina Aguilera, Ludwig van Beethoven, Mary J. Blige, Johannes Brahms, Ella Fitzgerald, Billie Holiday, Marilyn Manson, Meatloaf, Missy Elliott, Sinead O'Connor, Ozzy Osbourne, Marie Osmond, Queen Latifah, Carlos Santana, Tina Turner, Bill Clinton, Oprah Winfrey. Those are just based upon the most recent list that I've been able to get my hands on. That's a lot of folks. When you think about that within the context of famous people, what do those numbers and names look like in your community? What do those numbers and names look like in your family? What do they look like? So, Dr. Pitts, what do we do with all of this information? Well, a big part of what you do is you pay attention, because when you think about the reasons that I've shared with you about why people don't tell, ask yourself, why didn't you tell? Why didn't you tell? And whether it's sexual violence as an adolescent or an adult, or sexual abuse or violence as a child, why didn't you tell? And how is your decision not to tell impacting how you live your life in your day-to-day? The reasons why people don't tell are vast. There are many. But we are not going to be able to get a handle on this if people keep keeping the dirty little secret. One of the things that I learned in my research is that girls who have been sexually abused are more likely to experience additional sexual violence and violence types and become victims of intimate partner violence in adulthood. Bullying perpetration in early middle school is linked to sexual harassment perpetration in high school. Did you know that? How many of you have children in middle school that are being bullied? And how many of you have high school children that are being bullied? I started getting bullied in elementary school. I was bullied all through school. And the sexual abuse started early in my life. And then it carried over into sexual abuse and violence in high school and young adulthood. And you know what it did? With each act, it validated the low opinion that I had of myself. So the shame, the embarrassment, the humiliation, the guilt kept me in that perpetual cycle that resulted in me being more vulnerable for additional attacks. Is that you? Is that your son or your daughter? Or your grandson or your granddaughter, or your niece or your nephew, or your godson or your goddaughter? Think about those statistics that I said. 1 in 4 girls and 1 in 6 boys. Think about your last family reunion as it relates to those statistics. There are certain factors that you have to be aware of when it comes to prevention. And because there are certain factors that can increase or decrease the risk, you have to understand and accept the fact that it's going on. I hope that what I'm saying is resonating with you, because right now, while we're doing this live, somebody's child, somebody's brother, somebody's sister, somebody's mother, somebody's father is being sexually abused or sexually attacked. So when we think about the things that we can do to stop it, I'm going to give it to you from a couple of different perspectives. I said in the beginning that we as a society need to stop sweeping this dirty little secret under the rug. I've been a part of the RAINN, RAINN.org. I've been a part of the RAINN Speakers Bureau for 13, almost 14 years now. And RAINN stands for Rape, Abuse, Incest National Network. It is a phenomenal, phenomenal resource for those of you who wish to disclose, but you don't feel comfortable, or you don't feel like you have a safe space to discuss with family members or friends. RAINN is available to you. You can go to the website. There's 24/7 support available for you. You can remain anonymous. You're protected by HIPAA. You don't have to worry about your story getting out there unless you want to tell it. So we have to promote social norms that protect against violence. I remember growing up and being told, what you don't know won't hurt you. And what I came to realize very, very quickly by the time I hit adolescence was that's a lie. What you don't know can hurt you. And in the case of sexual abuse and sexual violence, what happens is what the Bible says happens. People perish for lack of knowledge. So part of how you liberate yourself and those that you love and care about is education. Think about the R. Kelly crises. Think about the Sandusky at Penn State, and the coach for the U.S. gymnastics, or not the coach, the doctor for the U.S. Gymnastics team. People capitalized on the vulnerability of children and adults. Children and adults. So don't delude yourself into thinking because you're a strong and powerful boy, or you're a strong and powerful man, or you're a girl who can fight, you can brawl, and all of these things, that it can't happen. We have to change the narrative socially around sexual abuse and sexual violence. Another way that we can stop it is bystander approaches, and I sort of want to expound on that, or tease that language out. Bystander approaches mean if you are walking down the street and you hear somebody screaming in the alley and you see somebody attacking them, it's not going to hurt you to call 911. In this day and time, breaking it up, that's up to you. It all depends on the situation, because you could end up wounded too. But it doesn't cost you anything to call 911. It doesn't cost you anything to raise commotion so that people can come to the rescue of the person being violated. But what about bystander approach in the family or in the community? What about, and I'm going to try and say this without crying. What I have seen personally and professionally is that people are perpetuating the abuse because they refuse to acknowledge the pedophiles in their family. The pedophiles in your family are not freaking secrets. They're not. But nobody wants to talk about it. Nobody wants to acknowledge that Uncle so and so and Auntie so and cousin so and daddy and my pedophiles. If you want to look at it in a spiritual context, it's a bloodline curse that needs to be broken, but it can't be broken if you won't acknowledge that it's happening. You think they're just going to all of a sudden stop? You think they're going to all of a sudden become sexually functional and not have an acquired taste for children anymore? That blood is on your hands. You have a responsibility to get involved. We can mobilize men and boys as allies. When you take into consideration that research shows us that men are the number one perpetrators, what are men being taught as boys? Are they being taught that they have this entitlement to another person's body, whether that person be male or female? There's a difference between normal, healthy sexual exploration and development compared to that of sexual abuse. Those are two very different things. And you're doing yourself a disservice if you don't educate yourself about them. Because let me tell you something about the normal childhood development where sexuality is concerned. If you don't educate yourself and know what that looks like where your children are concerned, then what ends up happening is you vilify them for engaging in normal developmental behaviors such as masturbation. And now sex is dirty. Everything around sexuality is dirty. So when someone touches them inappropriately or otherwise does something to them, you've already villainized sexual acts. So why would they tell you? Knowledge is power. I can't stress that enough. We have to do more educating. We have to do more teaching skills regarding sexual abuse and sexual violence. I'd teach a workshop. I would teach a seminar if I thought people would come. I sure enough would. You have to be willing to engage in social emotional learning. You have to learn how to regulate your emotions and understand the different developmental stages that all of us go through. Google. I want you to Google Erik Erik Erikson's ERIKSON''S psychosocial development model. I want you to Google that model and I want you to look at it. On the left-hand side of the model is a representation of what healthy development looks like from infancy all the way up until your elder years. On the right-hand side of the model is increasing your understanding regarding what you're growing up with fractured attachment and perpetuating dysfunction. I want to make sure that you understand it like this, folks. Just like you had to learn your ABCs and your numbers in kindergarten in order to be able to do preliminary math and reading in first grade, and understanding that each grade builds upon the other grade, when you don't do that properly, you have learning gaps. Hence why people get left back or people get pushed through school, but they don't have the foundational information that they need to successfully progress from each grade to each grade. The same thing is applicable in your psychological and your social and relational development. If you don't learn how to develop in a healthy way from infancy forward, you're going to have developmental gaps. And those developmental gaps can actually contribute to you being more vulnerable to sexual abuse and sexual violence. You have to teach healthy, safe dating and intimate relationship skills to teens. Don't wait. That stuff needs to be teaching. I told you, Barbara Sinatra's Center for Children. You need to be having these developmental healthy conversations now. Promoting healthy sexuality. I don't know what they call it today, but back in the day, somebody who had, was taken advantage of sexually, they called it having a train pulled on you. Hell, they called it something different today, I'm sure, but it's still happening. You hear about it on the news all the time. Such and such got drunk and passed out at a party and the whole football team had sex with her, or, such and such got drunk at the party and, four of the cheerleaders tied him up, whatever. You have to promote healthy sexuality and healthy dating in order for your kids to be empowered. And that's the other thing. Empowerment-based training. No means no. I don't care if you're walking down the street butt naked with all your glory hanging out. No means no. Now, of course, there are things that we can engage in to minimize risk, but we each have a right, whether we're children, adolescents, or adults, we have a right to say who is or is not going to touch our body. You want to provide opportunities to empower and support girls, women, boys, and girls, boys, girls, men, and women. There needs to be empowerment discussions, letting folks know it's okay to say no. It's okay to tell. You must. Strengthening economic supports is crucial. Many of you who know me personally know that I lived overseas in Barbados for a while, and while I was over there, I was dually enrolled. I was enrolled at the University of the West Indies, and I was enrolled at Drexel University, which is where I got my master's and my doctorate. And while I was over there, I was doing research for my dissertation study. And I did a lot of work with the DARE drug program while I was over there. I was working with 98 high school girls from 4 different high schools around the island. And what I learned was horrific. I learned that many of those young women had developed drug and alcohol problems as a result of being pimped out by their mothers for clothes, for food, to pay the rent. But guess what? That goes on right here in the United States. Don't think that it won't happen. Don't think that it can't. Because it can. And it does. And it will continue to, if we don't appropriately strengthen the economic supports in our communities. We're in an election year. Everybody's talking about the major presidential election. But don't you know the local elections are important too? They're extremely important. They're determining what's going on in your communities at the community level. but you don't vote. Some of you don't. You don't vote in your primary elections. You don't vote in the local elections. You just like, I'm just worried about the presidential election. You better be worried about your local election. You have to strengthen leadership. I remember before I moved to Texas, I don't know how many years ago it was now, but a story hit the local paper in the community about a teacher who had sexually abused a child in our school system. And there are some school districts around the country that the only time they do a criminal background check is when you're first hired. As a licensed therapist, I have to undergo scrutiny in my criminal checks, my behavior. Like, I'm not allowed to have contact with the police or anything like that. My credentials have to be re-verified every 2 years. How come we don't have that same requirement in our school systems? We would if you all voted for it, if you took the necessary steps to get it on the ballot so that you know whether or not your school has pedophiles teaching and coaching and administering. You have to create protective environments. In other words, it's up to each of you to create emotionally safe spaces for our children, our adolescents, our adults, for everybody to be able to say what's happening. I've shared with you on one other podcast that the person who sexually assaulted me my freshman year in college, I didn't report. And the reason why I didn't report is because I believe that because the person was a hotshot scholar athlete, that they would never be brought to justice. But that's not the major reason why I didn't report. The major reason why I didn't report is because I was promiscuous back then. And I wanted to spare my family the embarrassment, the shame, and the humiliation of my entire sexual history being put on trial, though I was the one that was raped. That individual is in prison today, serving a 60-year sentence. Because I wasn't the only person that he sexually assaulted. And he escalated to murder. That doesn't need to be your story. I can't undo the past, but I can make better decisions about moving forward as it relates to disclosure. And that's what I implore you to do today. We've got to improve the safety and monitoring of our schools. We have to have consistent workplace policies. We have to address the community level risk through environmental approaches. How bright are the lights in Walmart parking lot or in the grocery store parking lot or at the pizzeria that you frequent or on your street, your yard? You have to take the necessary steps to get the safety measures in place. You have to support victims and survivors in order to lessen the harm that's being done. There has to be victim-centered services and treatment for victims. I can't tell you how many times I've talked to clients who told me that they wish they had never reported because of how horribly they were treated. In other words, they were victim shamed. We have to address that. We have to put systems and measures in place for the treatment of at-risk children and families to prevent problem behavior, including sex offending. I want to say, I have a 12-year-old niece. She'll be 13 in a few months, and she came home from school one day. She actually got kicked off the bus from school one day because a little boy gripped her up on the bus and told her that he was going to marry her. Why did he think that it was okay to even invade her personal space? What are we teaching our children as it relates to respecting a person's space, respecting each other's bodies? That's a lesson that you can teach. Child sexual abuse is a significant public health problem and an adverse childhood experience. Child sexual abuse refers to the involvement of a child, person less than 18 years old, in sexual activity that violates the laws or social taboos of the society. How can a child fully understand what's happening to them if you don't educate them? If you don't teach them? If you don't empower them? If you don't let them know that this should not be happening to them? That's what I want to leave you with tonight. We must do a better job of helping and protecting each other when it comes to sexual abuse and sexual violence. We must. Any questions? Other than what's wrong with my lip? Allergic reaction. I feel like Eddie Murphy in the movie that he did with the talking animals. I thank you for tuning in tonight. I hope to see you back next week. I'm on a tear, if you will. Next week we're going to be talking about physical abuse, and the week after that I'm going to be discussing domestic violence. I'm going to give you the tools. Don't forget Barbara Sinatra Children's Center videos on YouTube. You can go to the Center for Disease Control. You can go to RAINN, RAINN.org. If someone that you know, or if you have been sexually abused or being subjected to sexual violence, you don't have to be silent another day. We are here for you. You definitely want to get help. You don't have to fight this battle alone. It's time to stop carrying the secret. Thank you for tuning in. Don't forget to share with family members, friends, colleagues, church members, whomever you think can benefit from this information, because so many people won't go to therapy. So I'll continue bringing therapy to you because you need this information, and you can take this information and use it as a beacon of light to go get the help that you need, either for yourself or for someone that you love and care about. It's time. Thank you for tuning in. Have a good night.